Elden Ring has lost 97% of its player base. We've looked at the analytics, this has been confirmed. Nobody's playing Elden Ring anymore. Meanwhile, plenty of people are still playing games like Mario Odyssey or Breath of the Wild, far superior, better games on Nintendo hardware. So what happened? Why did Elden Ring have such a steep decline in relevancy? Like, what could have possibly led this game to falling off the way it did? Well, the simple fact of the matter is this game was not good. It was never good. It never will be good. FromSlop will never put out anything good, memorable, exciting. Like, FromSlop is a company that was put on a pedestal because there was simply nothing else, okay? FromSlop was something that YouTubers and game journals were able to rally behind in order to create the illusion that they were hardcore gamers who played hardcore games, and so they took the meme and managed to sell a bunch of people on a mediocre action RPG from FromSlop called Elden Ring. And people played this game, and they were just like, what the hell is this? Like, the animations are stiff, the story makes no sense, Michaela looks like a girl. People were just, like, spelling out, like, all this, like, very clearly observable stuff. And even Miyazaki was coming out, and he was just like, Elden Ring isn't that good, guys. Like, it shouldn't have sold this well. But again, this is, like, the power of just, like, memeology, okay? This is the power of, like, memeing something into, like, relevancy. Because we saw this with Skyrim and, like, The Witcher 3 as well, where people, like, really hype these games up as, like, amazing RPGs that far surpass the entire genre, when, in actuality, they were far inferior to what Nintendo was doing at the time and before. Again, sometimes we have these, like, bursts of relevancies from these franchises that just are going nowhere, while Nintendo keeps putting out hit after hit after hit, and then with Breath of the Wild, they become, like, one of the best-selling games ever, okay? Again, we keep seeing this pattern play out time and time again, over and over again over the years, and people just can't seem to bring themselves to acknowledge it. Like, people don't want to admit that something like Breath of the Wild has retained its relevancy far more than Elden Ring. I put a ton of time into Breath of the Wild this year, actually. I got out the app, I got out the Korok seeds, and I started, like, hunting. I was just going over all these locations, solving all these fun puzzles, and putting, like, I think another 10 hours into this game. And it's just like, this is a game I did everything else in, by the way. The fact that you can, like, spend that much time playing Breath of the Wild, like, after an entire decade without starting a new file, it's an alien concept, I think, to most Skyrim players. Because if you talk to Skyrim players, they always do this thing where they're like, oh yeah, I'm starting a new file. Like, I'm starting a new playthrough. And the reason they do that is because Skyrim is so basic. It's so front-loaded that all the good content is in, like, the first couple of hours of the game. So you go through the good quest lines, you finish them, and then you're just kind of like, okay, time to restart it and do it all over again. Because, nothing outside of that initial, like, wow factor really resonated with people. Like, Skyrim, you would be hard-pressed to find anybody who even knows who the primary antagonist of Skyrim actually is. I imagine most people don't even know what the main quest line is. Okay? Like, nobody cares about Skyrim, essentially. The entire appeal is LARPing as you're a hobbit or something, and just wandering around this generic fantasy landscape, and pretending to be invested in, like, the lore. Okay, that's the Elder Scrolls. Like, it's not as good as Zelda, it never has been, but it blew up in the 2000s because of the open-endedness of it, which was a novelty at the time. Like, Elden Ring is absolutely the same thing, where it only took off because of the perceived difficulty, the perceived deep lore, and, like, the perceived, like, high quality from online fans. Like, take that away from it, and this is not a game that really resonated with people in any meaningful capacity. And I've actually seen a lot of people who were obsessed with Elden Ring a few years ago come out and say that, like, yeah, Harmon, you were right. Zelda was way better. Tears of the Kingdom was way better. I don't know what I was thinking. It's kind of like, if you're like a manga reader, like you've probably seen this happen where you see people get into like My Hero Academia or Jujutsu Kaisen or like Black Clover or whatever, and then like over time they start reading One Piece, and then like slowly start realizing how much better One Piece is than most other series, because One Piece doesn't have the same problems that other series have, because it does have an end game, it does have like character development, it does introduce new locations, powers, and ideas. It actually has good pacing. People complain about the length of it, but the pacing in One Piece is excellent. It actually has like mysteries to unsolve, and like has an overall like an overarching plot to it, right? You can't say the same thing about any of these other manga series, right? And I think the same can be said when you compare Nintendo to like other inferior developers like FromSlop, because the naive answer when it comes to this kind of thing is that like, well, FromSlop is better because they had Elden Ring. Like the naive answer has always been to like say that like, well, of course FromSlop is better because it's more hardcore, but the reality of it is, and anyone who's played both can tell you, that Zelda is better. It does have better boss fights. It does have better mechanics. It does have better visuals. The frame rate is better. Funny how, like, the frame rate is mysteriously never a problem when we talk about FromSlop games, by the way. The stories are better. Like, Zelda just is on a whole other level compared to Elden Ring and FromSlop. And even they know that. The only people who thought that like FromSlop was in any way comparable to Zelda were just spurbs who were just desperate to downplay the brand. And that's what we've been seeing over the past couple of years, is that Elden Ring simply hasn't lived up to the hype. And that is what has led to the massive drop in relevancy over the past couple of years. Without the promise of the DLC hanging over our heads and completely changing the experience, there's just no reason to go back to Elden Ring. There's no reason to care about it anymore. And now, people are willing to accept that, like, the DLC was bad. The base game was bad. The story was always bad. Without, like, any real anticipation of, like, the DLC, like, expanding on the plot and making it some radically different thing, what we ended up getting instead is this revelation that, like, wow, we were taken in by an advertising campaign. We were bamboozled to think this game was better than Super Mario Bros. Wonder and The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Like, we were tricked. And if only we had listened to Harmon Smith, if only we had bought his books and donated to his Patreon and donated him super chats on his live streams. Like, if only we had listened to him, we would have been able to figure this out sooner. And that's just the fact of it, is that I was completely 100% right about Elden Ring. This is a game that has fallen off in a big way, and not a single person cares about it anymore.